Hello and welcome back into another episode of The Hard Fowl. I'm your host, Pearson Fowler, and with me, as always, from GamecockCentral.com, beat writer extraordinaire, Collyn Taylor, freshly moved into a new home, a little bit closer to me, although, Collyn, you and I are still social distancing. We haven't done a show together in a very long time. And with each passing episode, each passing week, it gets a little more sad. But I think if we want to be optimistic about it, we can say that we're getting closer to being back in the same studio together and hopefully talking about actual South Carolina basketball games or, off-season or something here pretty soon. We're getting closer. It feels like, a small eternity that it's been. But we're getting closer to something, right?
You would hope. I mean, you would hope that all this time has led towards getting closer to football, basketball, wedding, whatever you want to think. So let's keep praying and hoping that you're right. And my optimism is just as high as yours is. How about that? Let's say that for now.
And I like talking to you because it puts everything in perspective, because I'm sitting here thinking about basketball and football, and you have a wedding that is supposed to be in October, and you're probably thinking about that above all else. So that's a good reminder that I should be thankful that I don't have that hanging in the balance. But it's not hanging in the balance. It's going to happen. It's going to be great. If it makes you feel any better, I'm going to a wedding in like 3 or 4 weeks, sometime in the middle of August. So if there's going to be a wedding in August, it's going to go off without a hitch, then y'all will be totally fine in October. Also, once we get to October, the basketball season usually starts right around the end of October, beginning of November. So if everything goes well with your wedding, which it will and which it should, then that means everything will probably be on schedule for basketball, hopefully, fingers crossed. And as we record this Tuesday morning, July 21st, Collyn, I believe this is the first day that the South Carolina men's basketball players can begin voluntary workouts after spending last week and this past week and arriving to campus. Is that right?
Yep. So they got back in Sunday, went through all their testing, and then on-court stuff will start today, Tuesday. So getting closer. It's starting to feel a little bit more like normal, but with football and basketballs back in and doing their things.
It's funny. I mean, it makes sense, but there's been something of a celebration. I remember when all the football players first reported to campus in the beginning of June. It was like, all right, here we go. Like, this is happening. It's football, and gave us an opportunity to talk a little bit about football. And in all honesty, around here, it's football first, and then, basketball kind of once the football season ends or, is effectively over, as it was by the time basketball season started last year, at least based on where the football team was. But this is the first time that I remember talking, not only here on this podcast, but also, on my local show on 107.5 The Game, talking about basketball players just reporting to campus and covering it. It's sort of like we cover football. But again, part of it's just the relief and the fact that guys are back on campus now and starting workouts. I mean, it's a good thing. I think there's a very realistic scenario, a month ago, where this wouldn't have happened. And you mentioned that it was already pushed back a couple of weeks, but you look around the country and there are a lot of places that have shut down voluntary workouts for fall sports and for the football team. And, I imagine at those places the basketball team hasn't even gotten on campus yet. But part of what this says to me, again, even though they're 2 weeks behind, is that everything that the football team has done in the last 6 weeks or so has gone well enough that they felt comfortable going forward with bringing the basketball team back around a normal time.
Yeah, I mean, this is big. This is something that feels like forever since we've gotten a chance to really talk about real basketball and not transfers or additions or recruiting. And it's welcomed, and it's getting these guys back. I talked to Frank last week, and it was just about getting back to some sense of normalcy. And you got to remember, these guys they got back to campus after Nashville and got sent on their merry way, not knowing when the next time they were going to come back was. And now they're coming back with a sense of normalcy, and that's kind of been Frank's, harping point is that, listen, we're going to get on-court work. That's not the worry. It's just about getting these guys back to where they feel comfortable, back in a situation where we can help monitor them and put them in a bubble and give them access to really good health care to keep them safe, to keep them healthy. And I just think it's a win kind of all the way around, and it gives us something to talk about. It gives the coaches something to do and something to focus on instead of probably going crazy at their houses. And like I am and like probably all of us are. But this is a good thing. This is a good thing, and I'm really excited to see how all of this shakes out and any potential positive or negative ramifications from having 5 or 6 sports on campus all at once.
I imagine making this work for basketball will be a little bit easier than football, just, purely based on the numbers game you're dealing with. Probably, all totaled 25 people. You have the 15 guys on the roster, plus 4 coaches, plus whatever associated training staff. So it's a significantly smaller number than you're talking about with the football team. But what do you know about the protocols that have been put in place for the voluntary workouts, and how similar is it to what the football program's doing?
Yeah, it's pretty identical. I don't know how many pods they're going to do, but, obviously they work in stages. They have different staggered weight room times. That way you're not having more than a couple guys in the weight room at a time. The way football's doing it, they're scrubbing things down. They're only getting, I think, 8 hours on court time, so they're staggering those. And it's pretty similar to football and how they're working it, just because it's a university-wide protocol. And, if someone does test positive, I don't think USC is going to release those numbers. But they quarantine, and they want to make sure that if someone does get it based off the pod system, they're not infecting 25 other people. They're only exposing themselves to maybe 3 or 4 or 5 instead. So it looks really, really, that's a really long-winded answer to say it looks really, really similar to what football's doing.
Well, yeah, I guess the biggest question.
Group of people.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's not surprising, and I guess that probably just, it's probably a university policy as much as anything else. But I guess the big curiosity for me was what it was going to look like in terms of the pods. Again, obviously it makes sense to do pods for the football team because you can't have 85 guys in the weight room at the same time working out and sweating and all of those kinds of things. But I didn't know if there would be any sort of exception made for basketball, or even not exception if it wouldn't necessarily be part of the protocol there. But again, that does make sense. And right now it is just voluntary workouts. Just so that other people know, and Collyn, I promise you this will not be the last time I ask because I'm terrible with remembering dates. But as we look ahead, today is the start of voluntary workouts. Again, Tuesday, July 21st. What's the next sort of deadline, and when can the coaches be a little more hands-on? And when does the preseason more formally start?
I want to say the preseason starts in October. I don't think I have a steadfast date, but I know that on-court stuff is allowed to start on July 20th. It was just and it can go for, I think, 8 weeks or until the first of school, which is middle of August for South Carolina. So I think that once they get that, they can do some more workouts when school starts. And I think the preseason usually starts into September, beginning of October for college basketball.
So it's a lot of just workouts until then, and no meetings, Zoom calls, the kinds of playbook kinds of things that the football teams have been doing. It's just kind of workouts until then.
Yeah, and I think that the on-court stuff involves a little bit of installation too. So September 15th, student-athletes can begin out-of-season work, which is pretty much the same thing as the summer workouts, just obviously closer to preseason camp. And then they kind of figure things out from there. And then the training camp style stuff usually starts about a month before the season, so beginning of October-ish.
Well, this is going to be as important an off-season and as important a training camp. And again, we're still a little ways away, a couple months away from training camp starting, so obviously we'll have plenty of time to discuss it. But there's a lot that has to shake out this season, especially with A.J. Lawson coming back. He did return to campus. You reported that middle of last week. Not a huge surprise. You had sort of predicted that, and he's still in the NBA draft. But he's back on campus, which is good for Carolina, although, as you and I, as we'll do in just a second, try to look forward to what this means for different lineups for Carolina. It's great because they have a lot of possibilities, but in some ways it makes things more complicated, but in a very good way. But A.J. Lawson still around and expected, I think, to be part of the team still this fall.
Yeah, I 100% anticipate him being part of the team, and absolutely think that he'll be here for his junior season. Obviously, things can change. You never know. All it takes is one or two teams to say, hey, if you're there at X pick, we're going to take you, and he stays. Or there's still a lot of unknown there. But right now I'm anticipating him being back. And we'll see from there. But if he comes back, we talked about it before, just how huge of a boost that would be to South Carolina in terms of maintaining some consistency and not having to scramble to fill a scholarship in July or August.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I mean, you laid out one scenario right there, and that obviously seems like the most likely is the team just contacting him and saying, "Hey, we really like your upside. We like what you think you can be for our team. Come play for us. Whatever. We're going to take you with a 58th pick of the draft, or whatever the case may be." But short of that, do you foresee anything else pushing AJ towards staying in the draft? And I guess to not really further complicate the question, but just to maybe give you a theory of mine, because the draft is so close to the start of the basketball season. Again, initially I thought maybe it's less likely that he will leave because he's going to be more invested by virtue of going through the entire offseason and preseason essentially with Carolina. But on the other hand, it could happen at the point in the preseason where maybe Seventh Woods and Jermaine Couisnard have just earned that starting backcourt. Do you get the sense that AJ would be okay with that, or is there the expectation that he's going to come back and if not be the guy, at least be a firm starter?
He's going to be he's going to get his minutes. You don't not give AJ Lawson his minutes. I don't think that's going to have anything to do with it. I think that he's going in anticipating the fact that he's going to start. He's going to play a lot, and I would anticipate that as well. And I think too the deadline August 3rd. You still don't know what a rotation is going to look like. You're still 2 months from the season before even preseason stuff. So at that point, even if things do go weirdly sideways, which I don't see him going, he wouldn't know anything. So I think that this is just a decision based off of him wanting to be drafted, him understanding where he is on that board and making a decision based off that, which leads me to believe, and the things we're hearing, that Lawson's likely to be back next season. Like I said, nothing settled in stone, but that's kind of the way it's been trending now for a while.
I'm with you in that, he's going to get his minutes, and he's good, and he deserves them, and all those things. I don't know. Maybe I would be a little bit less surprised than you if he's not starting at the beginning of the season. Do you just not think that's realistic at all based on experience? Or, how do you think about that? Because I think, Jermaine Couisnard's the starting point guard. The two, 50-50 maybe between, or maybe 60-40 AJ Lawson and Seventh Woods. But, Seventh Woods is a guy that's played a lot of basketball. It's played a lot of winning basketball, obviously up in North Carolina. Being a local product, being a very good basketball player in his own right, I could absolutely see him winning that role. And then I guess there's a scenario where maybe you just bump AJ to the 3 and have Keyshawn Bryant coming off the bench. But, again, there feel like more than 5 guys that deserve to be starting on this team, and I just am wondering who the odd man out is going to be.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest question for South Carolina this fall is trying to answer that. You look at Jermaine Couisnard can play the point, but if they want to move him back to his natural position at the shooting guard, the 2 spot, then you could put Seventh Woods at your point. And then AJ could slide to the 3, and then you have Justin Minaya, Wilden Vivek, Keyshawn Bryant that are battling for 3 guys for 2 spots. Or if you want to put Couisnard at the 1, and then have AJ at the 2, Keyshawn at the 3, Minaya at the 4, Lebec, Frank at the 5, and then have Seventh Woods coming off the bench. You can do that. It's one of those things where you have so many good options for you, and that's why I think a lot of people are high on South Carolina next year, because you have legitimately 6 or 7 guys that not only have the talent to be a starter, but deserve a starter spot just because they played really, really well over the course of 2 or 3 years at Carolina. So I'm glad that I do not have to make those decisions
right.
Because, if I'm building a lineup, I look, I think my dream lineup, just based off the stuff that I've watched and my personal preferences, you keep Couisnard at the 1, and then you have Lawson, Bryant, Minaya, and Lebec at center, and then you bring Seventh Woods off the bench as like a guy that can get to the rim and do a lot of different things. So it's going to be fun. I think that's kind of the biggest question this offseason. Like, okay, who does, number one, get the center spot, but then how do you settle the backcourt? And where do you play AJ Lawson and Jermaine Couisnard, who, Couisnard had to play out of position last year, and then AJ could play the wing or the 2, and should be a lot of fun to watch.
I like that. That's That's better than what I had penciled in, and more than like any one specific thing. I just kind of thought about all the variables, all the different lineups. And you and I have sort of played this out. I guess we did at the end of last season, and now that we have a more concrete idea of what the roster looks like, it's just as flexible as we thought. And I threw this out to maybe Jay, or maybe I threw it out to you the other day. I don't know. But the idea of Carolina going, ultra small is obviously appealing because we see a lot of that, especially in the NBA. Spreading the floor, having a lot of guys that can shoot threes, but a lineup of Jermaine Couisnard, Seventh Woods, AJ Lawson, Keyshawn Bryant at the 4, and Justin Minaya at the 5, with no one on the court that's bigger than 6'7". All of those guys. I mean, the worst 3-point shot. I mean, I guess I shouldn't say all those guys can shoot threes because Keyshawn Bryant cannot, but does sort of space the floor because if you give him a runway, you're gonna end up on SportsCenter that night and on the wrong end of a highlight. So that gives you so much, but Carolina, not only can play like a regular lineup, but they could even go extra ginormous jumbo if they want to play with Jermaine at point, AJ at 2. You can put, Justin Minaya at the 3, Jalen McCreary at the 4 as sort of your versatile wing defender, and then, like you said, Levesque or Frank at 5. I have no idea. Again, it'll probably end up being matchup dependent, which is nice for Carolina, although I want to talk about the other side of that in just a second. But if with all those on the table, plus the one that you mentioned, what do you think will be Carolina's default this year?
I think the default, again, we're talking about this, 3 months out, 2 months, whatever it is from the season starting, 4 months out. I think I take a look at this and say, all right, who are the guys that absolutely have to be on the court for South Carolina? Jermaine Couisnard obviously has to be on the court for you to start. Justin Minaya absolutely has to be on the court for you to start. AJ Lawson more than likely needs to be on the court for you to start. And then you kind of plug in after that. Do you put – if it's me, I think the default's going to be Couisnard, Lawson, Bryant, Minaya, Levesque. Just because Levesque gives you a little bit more of that rim protection that Frank loves so much, and some athleticism at the 5. And then Seventh Woods is your 6th man off the bench, where you can bump, if you need to take Lawson out, you bump Couisnard to the 2, and then Seventh Woods 6 over at the point. But yeah, I think, the biggest wild card here is obviously Seventh Woods. If you really want to think about it. Mm-hmm. Because if he comes in and doesn't play well, then it's an easy decision for the coaching staff. And then if he comes in and just absolutely lights the world on fire, then it's, you have a decision to make at that point. Do you take Lawson out? Do you take Bryant out, or somebody along those lines so Seventh Woods can get a spot in the lineup? Those are all questions that need to be answered. I think the default right now, independent of what Seventh Woods does, is Couisnard, Lawson, Bryant, Minaya, and Levesque, with a lot of permutations to come off of that.
You're right. That is the big question, and I wonder. And again, we talked a little bit about Seventh, obviously, when he officially transferred into South Carolina, and I guess the coaching staff doesn't really have anything else to go on between when we talked about it then and now, because today is the first day of those voluntary workouts. But it seems to me like it's easier to make that transition in college basketball, especially as a graduate transfer, than it is, say a quarterback or a wide receiver in football. The playbooks aren't as big. You're not having to adjust as much in terms of the language, scheme and different things like that. But with all that being said, how much do you expect this offseason to mean for Seventh? Because, again, we know what kind of basketball player he is. Based on the conversations you've had with the coaching staff and what you know about those kinds of transitions, like, what do you expect come the beginning of the season?
Yeah. So they really had to work on his jump shot. That was something that needed a lot of work when he came in to South Carolina, and the progress has been good on that. He understands defensive concepts really, really well. So I think that he's going to be a big boost on your perimeter defense. And he's a guy that, you saw last year, South Carolina struggled to get to the rim sometimes, struggled with aggression. That's not the case with Seven. That's a guy that understands how to get to the rim, how to make plays, and he's a guy that can just kind of create, whether that's for himself, whether that's for other teammates, whoever. And I think that's going to be a big, big thing for South Carolina. And if he can do that and just be a guy that comes in, runs a good point, plays a phenomenal defense, and can get to the rim, there's going to be a spot for you on the team. And that's kind of how I think the coaching staff is going to use him, at least early on, as a guy that can kind of probably come off the bench depending on how he does, and just kind of come in there, annoy the ever-loving hell out of the opposing offense, the ball handler there, and then get to the rim and attack, facilitate as a point guard on the offensive end of the court.
What does this do for Trey Hannibal? How does this alter his role?
Probably not a lot. Hannibal played 10 minutes last year in SEC play. I'm looking it up now, but I think it stays pretty much the same. I think it gives him another year to adjust. And, he played 12.7 minutes per game last year. I think that's going to be pretty much the same. I think that he's going to play some roles. He's going to come in, be a defensive guy. And there are lineups in there where I can see Seventh and Trey playing on the court at the same time, just because of how, defensive minded they are. If you need to stop, you put those two guys out there, and it causes some gunk out there. So I think you're going to see a similar role as Hannibal still tries to adjust to the college game and get used to playing in Frank Martin's scheme, both offensively and defensively.
That makes sense, just, again, using him kind of in that spot duty kind of role, because that's essentially what he was doing last year. But it seems like pretty much every podcast we did during the season was, Trey Hannibal played 11 minutes tonight, but he probably should have played more, It always felt like that. And again, it's hard in those situations because just because a guy is productive in somewhat limited minutes, oftentimes against, a backup point guard or a backup backcourt, you can't just necessarily say, all right, this guy's ready to play, 28 minutes a game against starters, every couple days in the SEC. But what is fair? And again, like, his role changes now, but what's fair to expect from him going from his freshman year to his sophomore year?
Yeah, I think that you want to see a jump in understanding the offense and the defensive schemes. I mean, Hannibal was a really good high school player, but when you're a really good high school player on a high school team that doesn't have other, at the time, Division I guys, SEC guys, it's a lot of 1v5 instead of 5v5. So Hannibal got sucked into that hero ball mentality a little bit, and it takes a while to break that when you spent 3 years in high school or 2 years in high school playing that style. So he's going to need to learn. If you see him take an uptick in just facilitating and just understanding how to play in Frank Martin's offense, I think that's going to be big. And then his jump shot. He needs to work on being able to score from all three levels. I mean, he's obviously an athletic powder keg of a person, but he needs to be able to hit from the mid-range consistently. And if he can develop somewhat of a three-point shot, then you can draw the defense out and space the floor a little bit better. So if you see that kind of Trey Hannibal, then he'll see some more minutes and probably see his role increase a little bit this season, especially for his junior year.
The two swing guys, I guess, the two guys that are probably going to be taking most of the wing minutes for South Carolina, and some combination of Brian and Mania play in the 3 and the 4. Both of those guys had a lot of injury questions last year. Brian obviously getting hurt in the preseason, missing the early part of the season, coming back, never really looking like himself. And then Mania obviously got hurt down the stretch, was able to come back at the end of the season. I guess Brian is healthy because he was healthy for all of last season. It's just a matter of him sort of getting back. So we'll come back to Brian, but what do you know about Mania? Is he full go as of today? Yeah,
he was ready to go. He's been training all offseason. He's looked good doing. I've seen some videos of him doing that. And his thumb, whatever, wrist, whatever it was, fully ready to go, good, healthy, and be full steam ahead.
And what about Brian? Again, last year, the injury in the beginning of the season really throws everything off because not only do you lose, I guess, sort of the fitness that you had worked up to get to, the preseason and the beginning of the season, but you're then working on getting back into shape, getting back to the point where you're comfortable, where you trust your leg. You're having to do that in games, and games that matter by and large by the time that Keyshawn Bryant got back. So that's a really, really tough adjustment. But what we saw last year, I think overall, just as a body of work in terms of his productivity, was disappointing relative to the expectations for him coming into the season. So what has changed about his approach, or is it just going to be a matter of he needed more time to get healthy and to feel comfortable, and this offseason should provide him the opportunity to kind of fully rehab and fully get back to that?
Yeah, I think that you saw it at the end of last season. I think of his last 5 games, 3 were double-doubles, and he nearly averaged a double-double his last 5 games. So that's kind of the Keyshawn Bryant that we were expecting all of last season. It just never came to be. And you saw it at the end of the year. You saw him start to trust his knee a little bit more, he obviously didn't have the concussion to deal with. And it started to round into form for what South Carolina, for what Bryant could be for South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And if he can continue to build on that, then he's going to be really, really good. He's going to be a huge piece to the South Carolina team, whether that's starting, whether that's off the bench, whether that's however the hell they want to use him. He's going to be amazing. He's going to be a key piece if he could stay healthy and do what he did last year, where it was getting to the rim, where it was rebounding, where it was effort plays. And that's going to be huge for what South Carolina wants to do this year.
And we just need to see more of him on SportsCenter. There was a ton of that his freshman year, and it felt like he left a couple at the rim. He got blocked a couple of times. Now, there, a lot of good big men, a lot of good defensive big men, especially in the SEC, it felt like last year. So, you don't necessarily hold that against him. And when you go for as many ferocious dunks as he does, you're going to miss a couple. But I was still expecting him to flush every single one. But by the end of the season, it was like, man, he kind of has missed a lot of these this year. So hopefully he's back to a point where he can finish a lot more of those this year, because other than like Jermaine Couisnard, like 3/4 court buzzer beater against Kentucky, I think the most exciting Carolina basketball play the last couple of years has just been, they left Keyshawn Bryant open. Boom.
Yeah, there are very few things in this life that I enjoy more than watching Keyshawn Bryant take off from like the 3-point line and drive baseline and then see someone slide into the lane to try to block it, because we all know how it's going to go. Mm-hmm. But they still try to jump, and then Keyshawn Bryant decides to end their life.
Yep.
And it's fun for everybody involved.
It's great. We need more of that. We need him to get back to that. So for a lot of reasons, hoping that Keyshawn is fully healthy and trusting his body and trusting his leg again. And like I said, he has a full offseason now. Let's just cross our fingers, knock on wood, whatever we need to do, because that is, like you said, going to be a real kind of pivot point for Carolina this year as they try to put together an amazing amount of just varied and hopefully productive lineups. Since we're just kind of going position group by position group here, the big men, you mentioned McCreary, again, as someone that's kind of, he played a little 5, I guess, last year, probably more of a 4, more of a defensive kind of guy, I would say, just at this point in his career, because his offensive game is so unrefined, and he's so athletic. He can offer you so many different things defensively. Although he did have a really good stretch there. I felt like he was 2 of 2 or 3 of 3 in just about every game. So good cleaning up around the basket. But mostly, I want to talk about Levesque. I want to talk about Frank, and then the 2 incoming freshmen. Obviously, Levesque started for most of the year last year. He's a good, solid, reliable 5. Somebody that Frank Martin likes to sort of be, the type of player at least that Frank Martin likes to see anchoring his back line, while Frank offers you a little more offense. And again, if you want to throw McCreary in there as like a real small ball 5, you can do it. But where does this leave the 2 incoming freshman bigs?
Yeah, probably. I don't think they'll start. I think they'll be rotational guys if they see consistent minutes. And that's not a knock on their talent. That's just they got 3-4 guys ahead of them. I think Levesque and Frank are the 2 obvious candidates to start at center. I'd probably give the edge to Levesque, just because, like I said, the rim protection, the just kind of raw athleticism he has, and Frank off the bench is a guy that can come in and give you some really, really, really good offense. But as for and then McCreary is obviously going to be a 4, rotating in and out of that with Mania and Frank and probably some other guys. So if we're talking about the 2 freshmen, I think Pat Iriel is probably the closest to ready, just because of his body type. Plays a little bit more in an offense that is similar to South Carolina's. Needs to play a little bit more back to the basket. And I think Benson's good. I think he just is a little raw. I think that he's going to take a year. He'll play a little bit probably, but he'll take a year to really get refined and get his body right. That's a big thing for him. If he can get his body right and grasp the offense and do that, then he has a chance because he's 6'7" with like a 7'1" wingspan. I mean, they don't make people like that usually. So there's things there that just you can't teach. So he's got some talent. It's just about getting his body right. And I think if we're going to put, of the two freshmen, I would definitely say Uriel's probably the closest to getting minutes early in this 2020-2021 season.
But essentially just a redshirt year for both of those guys?
Yeah, redshirt maybe not, but it's just going to be one of those where they're probably not going to see as much time just because they don't have to. And I think that's just kind of a testament to the depth South Carolina has in their front court when you don't bring in freshmen and you don't have to rely on them 20, 25 minutes a game.
Right. Well, there we go. Today, like I said, first day of voluntary workouts, players back on campus. That's, I guess, our prediction for how we think this thing's going to play out in the very early going. But obviously, as training camp progresses and as we get a little bit closer to the middle of September and the actual preseason starts for the basketball team, we'll have, obviously, a clearer picture, especially of 7th and especially what that big man rotation for Carolina is going to look like, because those are kind of the big looming questions for me. Before we get into a couple of Frank Martin's social initiatives, obviously he's had an incredibly busy offseason getting surgery on his knee or ankle. I don't know why I can't remember that, but was his knee or ankle?
Frank?
Yep. Knee. Okay, yeah, getting knee surgery, getting COVID-19, and obviously being incredibly involved in the fight for social justice around the country right now. We're going to get into a couple of the causes that have been, I think, particularly important to him and that he's been particularly involved in the last couple of months. But before we do that, I want to do, gosh, Collyn, it's amazing that we're doing this segment. I'm not used to ever having been able to do this segment at any point in my life, but a little bit of Gamecocks in the NBA, because right now there are 4, and all 4 of them are going to be participating in the Orlando restart, which is just about a week away. It's a week from this coming Thursday, July 30th. PJ Dozier, Sindarius Thornwell, Brian Bowen, and Chris Silva are all going to be participating in the Orlando restart. But Collyn, before we dig into the specifics of these guys and Sindarius Thornwell's new contract, I guess it was new last week. I don't know if that means it's still new, if that falls within the statute of limitations on what defines new. But I've had a lot of people in the last week or so, since I mentioned this, since you and I talked about this on my local show last week, pushing back on Brian Bowen being a Gamecock. Now, he was on the Gamecock roster. He did leave the NBA after most recently being affiliated with the college basketball program at the University of South Carolina. But he never did, in fact, play for the Gamecocks. So it's easy for me to sit here and say, hey, you know what? It's cool. There are 4 Gamecocks in the NBA. Some people take issue with it. I imagine you're in my camp, though, where you're fine with counting Brian Bowen as a Gamecock in the NBA.
Yep, I'm cool with it. He was on campus for a year. They market him, they talk about him, and he committed to South Carolina or transferred to South Carolina. So, you know what? We'll count him.
And he never played college basketball at all because he sat out the 1 year at Louisville, too.
Correct.
Yeah, so Louisville doesn't have any more of a legitimate claim to Bowen than South Carolina. But this is such an unusual scenario. I obviously can't think of anything like it in basketball or football, because how often do you have a guy? I mean, it would only happen in basketball. It wouldn't happen in football anyway. But how often ever have you had a guy go to college and not play college and then leave college and then still be in the NBA? It's so bizarre. It was at the time. And again, as I've had to reflect on it to try to justify my thinking that he's a Gamecock, I've just been mystified because it is just one of the most peculiar stories I can remember.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I don't know how to describe it, because obviously the NCAA probably was never going to allow him to play. And it's the weirdest because he went from McDonald's All-American to just a weird, like, I don't really know how to describe his career because it was really weird to begin with. And now he's an NBA player. And it's, for recruiting purposes and marketing purposes, it is not bad to have a guy that you can claim as an NBA player in your program's history.
Right. Well, that's the important part, is when Frank Martin and all of his assistant coaches go into other families' homes, they're just going to say, hey, look, we got 4 guys in the NBA right now. And if they push back, maybe you say, all right, fine. I don't think that would necessarily happen because I don't think that's how those recruiting calls go. But at the end of the day, you're saying, hey, we got 4 guys in the NBA right now. And Kentucky can say that. And, I'm sure a couple other teams in the SEC, I'm trying to think who off the top of my head, though, can say that. That's a really, really good look for South Carolina. And that's not a pitch that Frank Martin and company are used to being able to make. That's not a pitch that any South Carolina basketball coach in the last 40 years is used to being able to make. And I think that just speaks to, as much as like last season was disappointing and people are disappointed that Carolina hasn't made it back to the NCAA tournament since their Final Four run, I think that speaks to a level of consistency and productivity in the program that seems sustainable.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where South Carolina, in the history of the program, I don't know if has ever had 4 guys with NBA ties ever at once. And then 6 if you want to count Hassani Gravett and Dwayne Notice playing in the G League. So you want to talk about the job Frank Martin's done at South Carolina? That's it. I mean, when you have Sindarius, who's in an NBA team, Chris Silva, P.J. Dozier, and Brian Bowen, Hassani Gravett, most of these guys, though, weren't considered top 50 guys, All-Americans, when they were coming to South Carolina, and then they developed into that. Mm-hmm. That's huge for recruiting. Going into homes and saying, look at what we did for Chris Silva. He went from a fringe 150 guy to a guy that is on a multi-year deal in the NBA with the Miami Heat. Mm-hmm. So it's huge for recruiting. It's huge for a lot of reasons. And I mean, that's one of those where that is one of the biggest ways to measure success in the Frank Martin era. And I think it speaks too to how good that Final Four team was. And everyone kind of talks about it as, I've seen people mention as lightning in a bottle, but it's really not when you look back on it. I mean, Sindarius, Chris Silva, P.J. Dozier, Hassani was a role player on that team. Dwayne Notice, all of those guys are playing professionally in America. Mm-hmm. So just kind of speaks to how good he's been and the development's been at South Carolina over the last couple of years.
Well, I was going to ask you as a follow-up, if given that and given that South Carolina has been able to produce a higher quality of player than, over a short stretch than any period going back to, whenever, maybe the late 90s, if not, the 70s or 60s or whenever Carolina used to be really good at basketball before that. But if given that, the last couple seasons have been even more of a disappointment, but I think you just identified something which is just like, wow, it was basically that Final Four team was incredible. And, not lightning in a bottle in that, they shouldn't have done that or they overachieved. Again, relative to their seed, you say they did. But again, you look back and say, well, that was actually, certainly one of the most talented teams in the entire tournament that year, just based on the guys that went on to have professional careers. But maybe lightning in a bottle insofar as you had all those guys, on the team at the same time. Because after that, I guess it was Silva and then it was Gravett. And Silva was a all-defense guy, and Gravett was a sixth man of the year. But other than that, you lose PJ, you lose Sindarius, who's obviously an SEC Player of the Year. I guess it's just lightning in a bottle, and that you got all those guys in sort of the perfect moment in their career. A year after Thornwell was gone, and I guess PJ was gone because he decided to go early. You get Silva at a stage in his career when he's young and he's raw, but he was a fantastic role player on that team. I don't know the third best player on that Final Four team. It was a perfect confluence of all those events. And now you wonder, you look at the NBA talent on this roster. Obviously, AJ is sort of there on the cusp. Otherwise, maybe Jermaine Couisnard, someone that's going to have the opportunity to have a cup of coffee in the NBA or certainly the G League at some point in his career. You look at the talent across the roster and you say, all right, we're projecting forward. What's the next group of Sindarius, PJ, with role players like Dwayne and Chris and Hassani?
When you think about it, it might be this group. You look at Jermaine and AJ, who both have pro potential, and then you look at the role players they have, and a Jalen McCreary who We wrote a story yesterday where the guy was like, listen, he has a chance to be a professional player by the end of his career at South Carolina. And there's this roster they have now. I'm not comparing it to that Final Four team per se, because that Final Four team is the stuff of legend, just how talented they were. But when you look at just the depth and the talent level of this 2020, 2021 team, there's a reason why the people around the program are so high on them, because they have talent and they have a vocal leader in Jermaine Couisnard, who's as close to Sindarius Thornwell as they've had since then. And I think that speaks volumes as to them being able to sustain and get back to it after the BB gun incident, after Rob Felder, after some transfers in the 2017 class. It's huge for them getting back to where they think they can compete for NCAA tournament berths at South Carolina consistently with this group of talent.
Interestingly, the most heralded guy from that Final Four team, Sindarius Thornwell, was the guy that made it for South Carolina players in Orlando as he signed a contract with the New Orleans Pelicans. And his career in the NBA, he's had one. He's had one pretty continuously and pretty consistently since he left South Carolina, but it's been a little bit journeyman. Obviously, more end of the bench kinds of minutes. He got some good minutes with the Clippers and kind of spot work, defensive assignments. I remember there was a week and a half stretch where he was guarding, again, in sort of spot minutes, 12 minutes a game or something like that. But he was guarding Russell Westbrook, James Harden, and LeBron James. And Doc Rivers was just like, go get him. And, did a good job, because that's what you're getting with Sindarius Thornwell and with a Frank Martin kind of player. But he never projected the same kind of NBA upside as some of those other guys, as PJ and as Chris. But like I said, he was the guy that made it for. And the fact that he keeps sticking with teams, I think reinforces something that, people around here that covered Sindarius Thornwell and covered that Final Four run kind of knew, which is just that a guy that's going to work hard, play good defense, and is a high character guy. He always seems like someone that coaches and players are going to want in the locker room. And I think that right there is enough to help him have a long NBA career. He's not going to score 20,000 points, but it seems like he will continue to land on teams. And again, in the case of the New Orleans Pelicans, relevant teams.
Yeah. And he does some of the stuff that is really hard to find consistently in the NBA, which is defend at a pretty high level at all three levels. And then Sindarius has did that at South Carolina. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why teams enjoy signing him and having him on a roster, because even if he's only playing 5 minutes a game, those are 5 minutes where you're getting some pretty good defense and you're allowing starters to rest without too much of a dip in production.
Mm-hmm. Now, we would be remiss if we didn't mention, in the case of Sindarius Thornwell, and I guess probably in the case of Brian Bowen too, that some of this is circumstantial. Not that these guys wouldn't be on teams, because again, Sindarius Thornwell was on an NBA team this year. Brian Bowen was on the Pacers and playing spot work here and there, but players not being able to go to Orlando, contracting COVID-19, willingly holding themselves out has been part of the conversation. And I guess for Brian Bowen, the uncertain future of Victor Oladipo, the star of the Indiana Pacers, who's obviously in the backcourt there, who, they'll give him the ball. He's the primary playmaker, but he's more of a two. But regardless, opens up sort of a backcourt spot for Bowen, who's been on a two-way contract this year. But this is, this is what opportunity is. It's not about I'm just the best guy, so I'm going to get it. And, even if it was the case that, maybe the Pelicans would not have signed Sindarius Thornwell for the stretch run had the season played out as usual, but opportunity presents itself, and this is an opportunity. I point to those two guys specifically because, again, Chris Silva's locked up a long-term contract. PJ Dozier is a firm rotation player, more than just kind of the spot minutes here and there. He's a real rotation player for a deep and talented Denver Nuggets roster. But for Thornwell and for Bowen, this is a great opportunity.
Oh, amazing opportunity. Just to show that they belong in the NBA, whether that's as a starter, whether that's as a role guy or a guy who's playing 2.5 minutes, the NBA is the NBA. And if they go out there and all of a sudden they're averaging 6 points, 8 points, and 4 rebounds a game in the bubble, then other teams could take notice. And it could lead to a contract next year in the NBA and not just on a two-way deal. So, this is huge. If they can go out there and perform at a high level, and then it parlays that into potentially a long career in the NBA.
Now, the other two guys that I mentioned, again, Chris Silva, again, a pretty solid role player for the Miami Heat, and someone that Eric Spoelstra has just raved about. And Miami, I'm not a Miami fan. I watched a lot of Miami when LeBron was there, and I kind of just watch LeBron wherever he is because he's LeBron, and I want to watch the greatest player to ever do it. But watching the Heat after LeBron makes me wish that I were a Miami fan because, again, that would make it a little bit easier for me to pull for Chris Silva. But I'm just so enamored with their culture, and Chris Silva seems to embody that so completely. And it makes sense. We saw Michael Carrera, have an opportunity. He was on the Miami Heat Summer League team, I guess the summer right after he graduated from South Carolina, because I think there's a lot of crossover between what Miami does culturally and what Frank Martin likes to do at South Carolina culturally. Again, just hard-nosed basketball, defense, discipline. I think they have like a system of routine body fat percentage checks just to make sure that players are staying in shape. And I think it was when Dwayne Wade got back from Chicago, because he had that weird little dalliance in Chicago and then Cleveland and then eventually went back to Miami to finish his career, which is, always how it should have been. But they were just like, yeah, Dwayne, you're fat. You're not playing until you get into better shape, which is amazing. But for Chris Silva, I don't think there's a better landing spot for him. Again, it's paid off with a long-term contract, and Eric Spoelstra has spoken so glowingly of him. But I expect him to be a part of the Miami Heat for a long time to come, which is great because they're relevant. And Chris Silva is going to continue to be, on a pretty good stage in the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about fit at South Carolina, it's so important. But the Heat take that to the next level in the NBA, and there's a certain toughness about them. There's a certain level of, just sheer grit about him that Chris still kind of exhibits. And you saw him take a middling contract or just a two-way deal and then take advantage of the situation. It fits so well into that culture that now he's on a multi-year deal. And that's something that, not a lot of people can say. I don't think if it was anybody other than Chris Silva, he wouldn't get that kind of deal. And you've seen a lot of parallels between the Miami Heat program in the NBA and South Carolina's program in the college level, just in terms of fit. And it's why Chris Silva's landed there. It's why Frank Martin's very close to that organization. It's why they recruited Anthony Carter's kid out of Miami, Devin Carter. So obviously Anthony's an assistant with the Miami Heat. They have so much mutual respect for each other and so much similarities in terms of the program that's why you see South Carolina people get opportunities there and potentially thrive there like Chris is doing.
Miami has played 65 games. Chris Silva's played in 41 of them, averaging 8 minutes, 3 points, 3 rebounds. Here's the other big number, 2 fouls. That's a lot for just 8 minutes a game, but also if you had asked me to predict, I would have said that he probably would have been averaging like 10 fouls per 8 minutes. So great job, Chris Silva. But shooting 62% from the floor. Free throw percentage is just a tick below 70%. But I wonder if he's a guy that, again, like the Miami roster is interesting because they have Jimmy Butler, and other than that, it's like a bunch of really good players. It's sort of the Chris Vernon approach of just like, make sure no one on your team sucks. Like everyone's at least pretty good. But it seems like, he's an injury away or just, a hot streak away from playing, because it's not like the guys ahead of him are future Hall of Famers. It's just a lot of really good, solid role players, which, has me at least excited for the NBA restart and to see what Miami does, because he's always been in the mix. And you just need a sliver of an opportunity, and Chris Silva does as good a job as, anyone that I remember covering and taking advantage of that.
Yeah, and one of my all-time favorites to cover, and if we can start seeing Chris Silva play more minutes, I'm intrigued to see how many fouls he can commit.
Right.
Would love to see his per 100 on fouls, which is probably not great, but happy for him. I think he's got a long, long career in the NBA after his first deal runs out with the Heat.
Even though he, I guess, has spent maybe less time than any of those four in the NBA this year, he's the guy that always felt like he had the highest upside as a professional basketball player, and I think has worked himself into more of a regular rotation than any of the other three guys, and that's P.J. Dozier, who's, again, had a little bit of a journeyman career, played really well in the G League. He's been a part of the Oklahoma City organization. He's been a part of Boston, the Celtics organization, and has finally stuck in Denver. Again, sort of like Miami, a roster where you have Jokic at the top, and then you have just a bunch of really good, solid, strong role players. But PJ only played 21 games this year, but has worked himself into an 11-minute per game, I guess, regular rotation. He's averaging 4 points a game, 1.5 assists, half a turnover, so 3-to-1 assist-to-turnover ratio. And like I said, is really doing a good job. And they have, obviously they have Jamal Murray. They have Monte Morris, who's maybe the best or most underrated backup point guard in the league. So for PJ to continue to earn minutes and to earn more minutes, Michael Malone has spoken so glowingly of him. I think we're finally starting to see just a little bit. Again, when PJ was in college, I wasn't saying like, oh, this guy's going to be a multiple-time All-Star, but I was like, this guy just feels like a pro player, and after a couple years in the G League, it feels like he's finally tapping into that.
Oh, I agree. And you saw it with him and with Silva, where it's like, okay, you're looking at him and saying, all right, these guys have the body for it. These guys have, the talent, the athleticism, and it's kind of showing there. It took PJ a little bit longer to really latch on and start to kind of turn that corner. But, he had a phenomenal G League season before that got shut down. And, he's good. There's a reason why he was in the McDonald's All-American and helped South Carolina to a Final Four. And I think you're really starting to see that now that he's gotten comfortable and really retooled that jump shot a little bit for the NBA game. Yeah,
he's shooting right at about 40% from the field. He's gotten his free throw percentage up. It's still 64%. That's got to be a little bit higher for, a long guard. You need to be able to score a little bit more efficiently than that. But it's better than at South Carolina, where it feels like I pretty much remember him shooting like 10% from the free throw line, towards the end there, which was disappointing. But the other fun part about watching PJ this year, and I love the Nuggets because Jokic is probably my favorite player in the NBA right now. But if you're not an avid NBA fan, do yourself a favor. Look up some PJ Dozier highlights because most of them are him, running backdoor cuts and catching lobs from Jokic, which is it's fun to watch because just like in your brain, if you're someone that's watched a lot of basketball, you're used to the guard throwing the alley-oop to the center, but everything in Denver is backwards, and it's delightful because you have this, big 7'1" banger throwing these like beautiful touch alley-oop passes to guards that are just, cutting like crazy off the ball. So it's a lot of fun. I think that part of it has been good too, because it's not like PJ's just coming in with backup units and, kind of getting his own shot. He's really playing well within the offense, and I think that's a very democratic offense, so a good landing spot for a player like him that has the length, that has the size and the vision and the playmaking ability.
Yeah, and, he's got a chance to have another long career, and if he can land on a team that already has some superstars or some good players on it, where he doesn't have to be the guy, and he could be, your fourth or fifth base player as a role guy, then, that's a huge, huge benefit for him. And I think he's going to thrive in Denver. And I think they got a chance to make a pretty good run in the playoffs just because they have some talent. And, they're one of those things where the sum is greater than some of the parts. And I think that's going to be big, big, big for PJ.
We'll keep checking in on these guys throughout the Orlando restart, which, again, starts a week from Thursday, 9 days from right now. But looking forward to, I think we'll see all these guys playing some, but, especially for Silva and especially for PJ, because, also those two teams, I'd be surprised if Miami won the title. I'd be surprised if Denver won the title, but they're kind of in that second tier. It's like probably Milwaukee, LA, and then I'd probably say like Toronto, Boston, Denver, Houston, maybe Miami's in the third tier. But point is, they're on relevant teams that are certainly going to be in the playoffs, and we're going to get to watch for at least a little while longer beyond just the 8 games. They are all guaranteed. I guess Sindarius Thornwell and the Pelicans being the exception there, but we'll keep checking in on them throughout the course of the Hard Foul. Collyn, I'm so happy that we get to do a Gamecocks in the NBA segment like Wes and Chris and Will and I get to do Gamecocks in the NFL kinds of segments. It's kind of fun to follow those guys that we followed here for a while afterwards.
It's pretty nice, isn't it? And it's fun to talk about when we don't have college basketball. We have the NBA to be actually and tell stories about these guys that aren't 50 years older, that played in the 70s to do it. These are guys that played 2 or 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it's actually been fun because these are guys that I got to cover. So it's not just like me hearing stories. It's me getting to kind of not experience it with them, because if I was experiencing them with them, I'd be in a nicer place and I'd have a nicer car. But
be in Orlando right now.
Watch them. Yeah, best I'd be in Orlando riding Disney World rides. But it's been nice to kind of keep track of it.
A couple more things before we get out of here. As I mentioned, a couple social initiatives that Frank Martin's been very involved in this offseason, as in addition to fighting COVID-19, there has been a fight against racial injustice all around the country. And a couple that I wanted to highlight real quick, Frank Martin has been a part of the Mclendon Foundation, which was founded back in 1999. He's been involved for a while, but he and John Calipari and a couple other coaches, and I think Will Muschamp, have recently gotten involved with a new initiative. Collyn, tell us about that and how Frank Martin got involved.
Yeah, so it's the Mclendon Foundation, Mclendon Minority Leadership Initiative or something like that. And it's designed to help place minorities into athletic administration, into positions where they could work themselves into athletic director, associate athletic director roles. And it was started by John Calipari and Harvard's Tommy Amaker. And they reached out to Frank Martin about the idea, and Frank wanted to help provide monetarily for it, with scholarship money, and obviously be a guy that helps implement some of those initiatives on his campus. And Muschamp, Frank called Muschamp, talked to him about it, and Muschamp was all on board too, wanting to get more minorities into athletic administration to where they're making decisions at the campus level, at the university level, at something along those lines. And both of those guys have donated scholarship money to it, and it's a way, in talking with Frank and in talking with Will, just about getting more people that look like the athletes. I mean, the majority of college athletes are African American, are minorities, and getting them into positions where they can help make some change at the university, at the athletic department level. And I think it's a pretty noble cause for them, and something that really does mean a lot to them and to their staffs and the people they coach.
And it's a really cool way to approach it too, because so often it's the people that are visible, it's the athletes, it's the people that were watching on TV and following and recruiting, and like you and I were just talking about, following after they leave college. But by and large, those aren't the people that are making the decisions. Frank Martin put it very plainly. Head coaches don't hire other head coaches. So from the players, which is where our focus normally is, we focus even a little bit less on the coaches, and we focus almost none at all about the leadership. It feels silly when I was reading about this initiative and listening to you tell me about it, and it's like, oh yeah, duh, you need to start at the source to fix some of these issues. You can't just fix it on the ground, because this originates somewhere. So I appreciate again everybody involved, but especially Frank Martin, Will Muschamp, just again as guys that have done a tremendous job locally, and for Frank Martin especially on even a larger stage, given the opportunity to take a hard look at these things. And while it feels obvious, clearly it wasn't obvious, because this is something that needed to be done, and an initiative that needed to be made. But I don't know. I feel silly for not thinking about that until the people at the Mclendon Foundation sort of brought it to my attention. But I guess that's sort of part of the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, and Frank talked a little bit about it too. He's like, as coaches, we always try to, when we talk to players, when we say their playing days are done, we always try to steer them into coaching. But he goes, why not try to steer them into athletic administration? Mm-hmm. And he's like, listen, there are plenty of qualified minority head coaches out there that don't get the same opportunities that white coaches do. And always been, me personally, a big believer that people tend to hire people that look like them. So if you have more minorities in leadership roles, whether that's associate athletic director or provosts or university president, athletic directors, they're more likely to hire minority head coaches. And that gives you a little bit more diversity at the head coaching level, at the university level. And I think diversity is usually a good thing, especially when you're dealing with sports that are, for the most part, minority driven. Minorities play them, and I just think it's a good thing all around. I think that it's important to get a lot of different viewpoints, and I think you get a lot of that at South Carolina with two minority head coaches for the leading basketball programs, and Will Muschamp, who's done a really good job handling some of the stuff that's gone on over the last couple months. So all around, I think it's just a phenomenal job that they've been doing with this Mclendon Foundation.
The other initiative with which Frank Martin has been heavily involved, I guess we spoke a month or so ago about Frank Martin taking a leadership position with the National Association of Basketball Coaches. I think specifically within that was essentially the Diversity Council to put forth and work on some of the proposals that came out last week, which I don't know what exactly they're calling it, but this is essentially a proposal that in the interest of eliminating a test that a lot of people have cited as culturally biased, Frank Martin is moving and proposing, along with a couple other people that are on this NABC bill, to eliminate the SAT and ACT as sort of a preliminary criterion for college admission. Now, Collyn, before we talk a little bit more specifically about this bill, how do you personally feel about the SAT/ACT?
I don't think that it's a good judge of whether someone's college ready or not. Just me personally, I mean, I've met people that have gotten high SAT scores that didn't blow me away intelligence-wise, and people with lower SAT, ACT scores that did. I mean, it's one of those things where I think that there's so many other valuable metrics to use, whether that's GPA, class rank, course load, extracurriculars, personal essays, things that show intelligence more so than a 3-hour test that you take on a Scantron sheet. And I think that, listen, I am a white guy. I don't deal with a lot of the same things that, African Americans or minorities in America deal with. And I think if Frank and a lot of the guys that are on this panel, on this committee, want to take a look at it and that are minorities, I'm all for it. Just because I'm going to admit that I don't know everything. And if they feel like it is, I think it's worth a deeper look. I think it's worth, talking about and discussing. And if they feel that way, then there's obviously got to be something to it. I know this has been a hot button issue for a while, and now that it's coming to light again. And I think that even if it's, you find that the cultural bias isn't as in depth as some people think, or some people don't think, that there are still plenty of other ways, even if you get rid of it, to judge whether someone's intelligent or not, that don't have to deal with, again, a Scantron sheet 3 hours on a Saturday morning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think all that's fair. And I remember being so I went to Furman, and they did away with SAT and ACT scores already. This is not a required part of the admission process, and some schools have gone ahead and done away with it individually, but I guess this would be a more standardized way of approaching it, and I think specifically for athletes. But I remember being incredibly frustrated because Furman, it might have been my freshman year, maybe my sophomore year, but it was basically right after I had started school there. They were like, hey, we're not looking at SAT scores anymore, and I'm like, I'm so glad that I took that stupid thing 3 times and the ACT. Like, I think it would be better for everybody. I've never liked standardized tests. It's frustrating, and I'm with you, that it's not even close to the best way to. It's not even a good way to determine which individuals are ready for college and not. So, selfishly, personally, and also just understanding and having talked to some more people to have a greater understanding of what it means for a test like that to be culturally biased. I am all in favor of this, and for the sake of my children and people all around the country, I hope they don't have to sit in that room for 25 hours and pack your snacks and take that stupid test where they tell you not to read the passages. It's like, that's not reading comprehension. They're just teaching you to where to look for the right details. I don't know. I hate standardized testing. So again, personally, and also looking at the bigger picture, which is what Frank Martin has been doing, I'm all in favor of doing away with those things. Just GPA, extracurriculars. I like that you said personal essays, because I think that part of it, speaks maybe more than anything, including GPA. But what's your level of self-awareness? What are the things that you want? How do you write? How do you think? You can glean so much from reading something that someone's written, which is I don't know. I think more stock should be taken in those things. And speaking of understanding people based on how they write, Collyn, I feel like you're not that your colleagues aren't, but I feel like you're about the most honest writer at Gamecock Central, and that every time I read something that you write, it feels like you're just talking to me. You have a nice kind of casual, colloquial style when that's appropriate, and you got a bunch of good stuff on GamecockCentral.com right now that I would encourage all of you to go read, because Collyn just works tirelessly over there. I'm sure you're just bored because, like you said, you're sitting in an empty house, so why not just turn out 15 new articles a day? But as we're talking about basketball, you have a good piece that I didn't want to spoil too much of. But if you want to give us a quick teaser, you talked to Jalen McCreary's trainer, and we talked about McCreary. We touched on him earlier just as an interesting sort of versatile swing 4-5 option for South Carolina. Again, people can go read the full piece at GamecockCentral.com, but just give me broadly a little teaser of how your conversation with Jalen McCreary's trainer went.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great conversation. Calvin was more than forthcoming about some of the stuff that he's worked on. He was pretty honest about what Jalen's been doing to improve. They're working a lot of shot and his ball handling skills, which is something that obviously needed some improvement going into the sophomore year. But he was honest and kind of talked about reaching his potential and kind of the stuff they've been working on and the growth he's seen over the last, I want to say, about 2 months that they've been working together. And it was one of those things where it was a really, really good conversation and something that I think a lot of people get good information out of just because it's something we don't normally typically write.
Go check that out, GamecockCentral.com, and seriously, everything else that is being published right there right now. It's a lot of stuff. It's football recruiting, it's basketball recruiting, and all sorts of good stuff because that's where you need to go. That's your hub for all things Gamecock. So check it out, GamecockCentral.com. Follow him on Twitter at Collyn Taylor with a Y. Collyn, this is great. Thanks so much. Hope everything's going well in your empty house, and hope we can do this again soon.
Absolutely. Let's try to get this done a little bit more now that we actually have basketball to talk about. It's not just
right? That's going to be good.
Tidbits of information,
Yeah, just a little bits to leak out and a hype video here and there. But we'll be getting back into a more regular schedule here on the Hard Foul as we get a little bit closer to the basketball season, which fingers crossed. And, I think next week we can talk about what the season might look like, especially as we get a little clearer picture of what the football season is going to look like. I think that will help us draw some conclusions about what the basketball season will look like as well. So with that, rate, review, subscribe to this and everything on the Gamecock Central Podcast Network. And for Collyn, I'm Pearson. We'll talk to you next time.